Hey everybody, it's Nicki Wiedeman. We've got some folks that are coming into another webinar that we're so excited to share with you today. A very important topic, and we hear lots of different terms for it, but I'll kick it off by saying aftercare within the death care profession. And our title today is Aftercare Matters, Guiding Families with Compassion and Clarity. And I think there's another word that fits into this, and that's customer experience. And, we've been harping a lot on that here at Dead Ringers, the importance of creating experiences for our families. We've spent a lot of time studying this, and we feel that this is a great dovetail into creating customer experiences for your families. So we're excited today to have our guest, Matt Van Drimmelen. He is the owner of Full Circle Aftercare, and he's going to share some really great stuff with us. We spent probably an hour and a half with him just talking about all of the great things that can happen and some of the pitfalls that can happen with aftercare. And I'm going to put him on the spot. He says, I like tough questions. So
Right.
we love tough questions too. So speaking of that, if you do have some questions as you're hearing the webinar go along here this afternoon, use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll save some time at the end to ask Matt some of those questions. Pat and I, my partner in crime here at Dead Ringers, Pat
Right.
Downey, who has lots of experience in the death care profession, both on the cemetery and funeral side, will have some of those hard-hitting questions, probably more than I do. I'm feeling nice today, Matt.
Mm.
So, but we're really excited to hit on this topic, and there's so many things that can happen now with aftercare. I got my start years ago with Forethought, which is Global Atlantic now, and we had suitcases that we helped our clients with that had all of the tools and techniques that we could follow up. And to think that there may be so many more easy ways to do this with technology, so I'm sure you'll share some of that with us today. For those of you who have sat into some of our other webinars or who are aware of us at Dead Ringers, we are obsessed with measurement and metrics. And Pat reminded me of that just a little bit ago, and the importance of knowing if something works or it doesn't. So I'm sure Matt will expound on that too. But we measure about 10 or so key things in the call quality of funeral homes and cemeteries, also pet loss, other areas around death care. And one of the key things that our ringers, as we call them, will ask them objectively at the end of the calls, were you offered any kind of follow-up? Now, a phone call discussion may be a little different than a full-fledged aftercare program, but there seems to be something that scares us within the profession and setting the tone that a conversation can happen after a phone call, after the loss of a loved one, whatever that might be. And we have scores of up to 100 in all of those key areas, whether it's the whole or the transfer, it's empathy. And the area that always scores the lowest out of 100 is follow-up. And as of today, I looked at our dashboard. Out of 100, our score is not even 25%, it's 24.4. So that's better than it was a couple of years ago, because we're hopefully bringing that to the forefront, the importance of setting the tone that we still want to have a relationship after any kind of conversation that we have. So we have graphs for everything. And if you think of kind of a bar graph, it's this, what I call the valley of despair. So we have all of these great measures around empathy and etiquette, and then boom, when the metric with follow up there, it's just not there. So we're so excited to have an extended discussion today about that, and specifically what can happen after a service. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt. And if you could give us a little bit of background about who you are and a little bit about what you do, I think that would be a great way to kick off our webinar today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nikki. It's just an honor to be here. And I'm a big fan of Dead Ringers and the client. I think what you do is fantastic, although sometimes humbling to realize all your flaws, but it's necessary in order to grow. So my name is Matt Van Drimmelen. I grew up in the foothills of Utah, as much outdoors as I possibly could, and married my high school sweetheart, and so we stayed around here as well. We have six beautiful children, ages 6 to 17. So we're busy and so blessed. My background is actually not in the death care industry; it's in engineering, and I was working as a government contractor, and soon realized that government work is oftentimes a cesspool of mediocrity, and it was it was not the best place for me. And so I started kind of looking, putting feelers out there, and had a friend who worked at a funeral home selling pre-need, and there he realized that every he was supposed to meet with every family after the at-need appointment to sell them pre-need, and every single family was desperate to meet with him, but not about pre-need. They were desperate about all the next things that they had to deal with, and they felt so overwhelmed and so alone. And he came to me and he said, they need to be contacted by someone who's there to serve them and not sell them something. And I think by doing that, we can actually sell more pre-need. So he had this idea of creating an aftercare that didn't have ulterior motives, which most of the aftercare at that time did. Not the case today, but and that's what we did. And so in 2013, we created that, and then in 2016, I bought him out. He wanted to kind of focus more on the pre-need side, and it's been wonderful. We have clients in 38 states. We have served dozens of thousands of families, dozens of thousands of families, right? I'm not sure exactly how many we're at, but I think we're approaching close to 60 or 70,000 families that we've been able to close out all their estate issues. And I have just the most amazing team. I think I don't have a lot of talents, but one talent I seem to have is just getting the most amazing people to come and work here. And they have done such a good job of taking care of families and taking care of our funeral home partnerships.
Well, Matt, if I can just kick things off here, I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
there's a lot of people that are likely on the webinar today that aftercare is a term that's used fairly widely. Sometimes it's continuing care or post-service care, and it can be a lot of different things to a lot of different firms. It might be just a look. In some, it's aftercare means grief, helping our clients on their grief journey and providing resources and maybe groups and support groups. That's our aftercare. Another aftercare might be, no, we have a packet that helps people with estate settlement. And then, yes, you may have aftercare that the company or the organization is hopeful that it will build a bridge into a pre-arrangement discussion. So all of that's out there, and everyone has their own different flavor maybe of what they see as aftercare. So from your perspective, you've been focusing on this.
Right.
It's your business. This is what you do. So would you just share with us right now, 2025, what would you say is the most effective model and all the components of that for the best aftercare program you can have?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that it really depends on what your goals are as a funeral home. But if you look at aftercare, like you said, yeah, you ask 100 different aftercare specialists what aftercare is, and you're going to get, or as funeral home owners, you're going to get 100 different answers, right? But it really breaks down into probably three main categories. There's follow-up type aftercare, which would be cards, texts, emails, um, and sometimes phone calls, just to check in on the family. Sometimes ask them for a survey or ask them for a Google review or see if there's anything they need. Then there's kind of the grief care, where we're kind of developing resources and families can use it. And then there's the estate help and helping them with all those next steps. And then we call that service-based aftercare, really serving that family in those next steps. The fourth one, I said three, but there's one fourth one, and that's really just like I said before, it's pre-need. And pre-need unfortunately gets confused as aftercare. Pre-need is really important. But I think it should work hand in hand with aftercare and shouldn't be your aftercare program of just having your pre-need agent reach out to families. But of all of those, I think follow-up aftercare is extremely important. Having someone reach out to the family. I had someone talk to me who said, they lost their loved one and they were at the graveside, and the funeral director hugged him and handed him his card and said, call me if you need anything. And then he never heard anything after that point. And he said the silence was deafening. and just feeling so alone. And I feel bad for the funeral director because I'm like, well, that funeral director has 8 other families they have to go serve. But some way to reach out and know that family you serve is, I think, the first step as far as effectiveness. The better step, there's a good, better, best, is to reach out to that family in order to serve them, in order to help them with something that they're dealing with, in order to give them something that they desperately need. And when you're able to do that, it cements the legacy of all the other services you've done for that family. And it really kind of sets the tone of like, we are here for the family and we're willing to go the extra mile and serve you in ways that you might not have even realized at the beginning. And now, if you can turn that into something that also bridges the gap back to pre-need and back to Google reviews and back to feedback, and if you can get those 3 benefits out of your aftercare program, then you have a strong aftercare program.
Yeah. You said, the funeral director has 8 other services, but, and so, funeral homes, cemeteries were really busy. I have to share this because I spend a good 15 minutes on empathy with phone etiquette. And I had someone tell me, I'm too busy to be empathetic. Anyway, maybe you need to do some soul searching around why you got into the profession. But anyway, these are the kind of hard hitting things that we're hearing, guys. And no more Miss Nice Guy sometimes. I think we really need to think about a funeral can be one of the most expensive purchases that a family can make. And then not hearing the silence is deafening, that, there isn't that follow up. So what would you suggest, in a busy location, the best way to approach, aftercare?
Great question. So I'm a big proponent of like, do what you do best and let others do the rest, right? So I always try to make sure, whether it's my employees or myself, that we are trying to, each of us, focus on where our strengths are, and then get help outside. It seems, I think, from a business owner perspective, it seems like, well, if I just ask my staff to do one more thing, it's almost like a free program. But your staff is already so overwhelmed that if you don't have some kind of support for them, something's going to go right. At some point, their focus is going to be waning. So they can either focus on the at-need families and being the best empathetic helpers for them, or all the families they served in the past. But they probably can't serve on both. So I would either bring on a full-time person to do aftercare, or outsource it. Is probably your best options. I also, once again, would say, to that same point, do what you do best. So a pre-need salesperson should focus on pre-need sales. When you're asking them to run your aftercare program, there's going to be a lot of families that need help that don't need pre-need. And now that pre-need agent is stuck. Do I spend the time being empathetic, helping someone that I can't make a commission on? Or do I just kind of push them by the wayside and go focus on those who I can make a commission on? Well, either one of those is bad, because either you as a funeral home is losing out on commissions and not selling as many pre-needs, or you're getting inconsistent service where some families are getting helped and getting this amazing service and helping, and other families are just not. And you never want to have a business that's inconsistent, that helps some families more than others. You don't want to be that person in the community.
Well, that brings up some follow-up questions here, because
Yeah.
let me just say, I put myself in the position of a funeral home owner, a cemetery owner, and while I totally agree with, do what you do best and maybe let someone else handle the rest. That's a great phrase. But how do you engage with the customer when you're actually not employees of the funeral home? A lot of times the holdback is, look, we want to have our people engaging with the family. I think the great part, at least in recent years, we've really learned that we have to look at the entire customer experience. We spend a lot of time with that. I know Nicki does too. The customer experience journey throughout the entire service cycle. And part of that is what happens after we deliver our primary service. But how do you engage with the families? Do they ever ask you, like, well, do you work at the funeral home, and how do you stay consistent?
That's a great question. And really kind of I probably have a couple part answer to that. So um, it I had someone ask this question at a panel that I was on just about a month ago, and I was not able to answer it, and I wanted to answer it so bad. So I'm really excited to. But her question was very similar to yours, and she said, "Well, the relationship should be with my funeral directors, and if an aftercare person comes in and helps them, that undermines my relationship." And I agree with that to an extent. Um, One of my favorite books is The Speed of Trust, and it talks about trusting people and how important that is for business. Um, it's by Stephen R. Covey. So his son, Stephen R. Covey Jr. Anyway, in there, we talk about there's two levels of trust. There's trust because I like you and that integrity side of it. And then there's also trust in your capabilities. And when you're willing to have someone who is more capable than you bring them in as an expert, it actually makes me trust you more, right? So, for example, if we're doing a deal together and I bring in, any kind of business deal, and I bring in an attorney, or I bring in a financial planner, or I bring in someone else who has another set of skills to look at our deal, it makes our deal better. Um, so when a funeral director who's focused on doing really good job with the funeral says to the family, "Hey, the next steps you're going to be facing after the funeral are going to be very complicated, and we've seen a lot of our families really struggle through it. That's why we have hired a dedicated team to help you with those next steps. So I'm going to assign one of our state specialists to be your guide moving forward." We complete that link as we call them, and we say, "Hey, Pat, Nicki, your funeral director, was the one who assigned me to work with you. I am the one helping you with all the next steps, and I will report back to Nicki on everything we can do," right? So what that does is it builds trust. It also makes that funeral director look really good, because that funeral director is willing to go get the proper resources of the experts to help them with those next steps. Now, part of our agreement with the funeral home is that we are a white labeled service. And so we work under that funeral home's name. So from the family's perspective, they think we're a funeral home staff typically, or at least funeral home staff adjacent. That way, any goodwill we create is unique to that funeral home. And I'll give you an example of that. Uh, we had a family call back one of our funeral homes down in California, and she said, "Oh, I didn't realize how wonderful you guys were." And this was about 9 months after her husband had passed away. And the funeral director's like, okay, what did we do so great? Why would it take 9 months to give us a call?" And she said, "Well, my sister-in-law just lost her husband, and she called me yesterday in tears, because after the funeral was over, she had to go start with all these next steps and all these next processes. But unlike you, where that you helped me with those, she had no one to help her. And she called me in tears because she had spent 8 hours on the phone with Social Security to try to get her spousal benefits and had gotten nowhere." And she called me. She goes, "How did you get through this?" She was emotionally drained, physically drained. Her time was taken. And she said, "Well, the funeral home just did it for me. Like, they called me and they got me on the phone, and we talked to someone, and we got my benefits all worked out. It took like an hour." And she goes, "I didn't realize that you're the only funeral home who did that." Well, luckily this was a big Hispanic family, and I don't remember the final number on this, but I think it was somewhere between 8 and 12 family members came in and bought pre-need. And then they all went on, even people who hadn't had the funeral there, they all went on and wrote Google reviews for them, and they were word of mouth referrals. And you had family members like bringing in their friends saying, "Hey, you know, I have my friend here, her mom's going to pass away. We want to make sure that they come to your funeral home." And the funeral home owner was ecstatic. because linking it underneath that funeral home's goodwill and making it part of their identity is what differentiated them in the market and created brand loyalty that they had never seen before. And so that's I think why it's so important to link to the funeral director, to give them credit, but also realize that that funeral director can't do everything. They're not an expert. And so bringing in other experts to help that family doesn't take away credibility, it adds credibility.
So then your people respond back to the funeral director in a timely manner. So,
Yes.
I mean, the family may call the funeral director back for other reasons that they need. And
Yeah.
so the funeral director probably wants to know, well, would appreciate it. You know, I talked to Mrs. Jones and we had a great visit and here's what we're doing. And
Yeah.
here's where we're at.
Yeah, that communication back and forth is important. They all have access to look it up instantaneously, so they can actually see us as we're talking to the family. They can see everything that's happening, just in case they don't want to make that phone call. But that communication back and forth has to happen. Communication within any company is necessary, or things should fall apart.
You use a dashboard then, kind of like we do.
Yeah, we have a live dashboard that they can log on. They can look back, and so that will tell the status of each family that we're helping and everything we're helping them with. It also tells the update of all the pre-need, because we introduced the concept of pre-need, and so that's for the pre-need team, and then we get feedback from the family, and so it has all that feedback there. If we sent them a link to do a Google review, if they're upset, we're not going to send that link, but we're going to send that to the funeral home owner saying, hey, this family's upset about something. This might be something you want to address, right? And so that's really important for us to be that safety net for the funeral home and be really transparent, so they can see all that feedback and know what's going on.
Very good.
What a beautiful result, with that. However, I mentioned the Valley of Despair earlier, and
Right.
You think of the outcome of this, whether it's pre-need coming in or really good Google reviews. Where do you think this why we aren't approaching follow-up? I've asked pointedly to some of our folks, why don't you offer follow-up? And like, well, we don't want to bother our families. We there's a fear there that I'm going to anger them, or I've heard, well, our families don't want that. I'm like, did you do a focus group and ask them? But
Right.
so what are ways that you've kind of addressed that fear, and that, well, I don't want to make my families angry. I don't want to call them at the worst time, or what. I'm sure you get those kinds of questions, and how you might approach that. So what can we do to overcome kind of the fear in taking that next step?
Yeah. So my son is 15 years old, and he's just starting that girlfriend experience, right? Starting to get girlfriends. And we have all been in that experience. Remember that really needy girlfriend or boyfriend who, I mean, just yesterday as I was taking him to school, he was like, "Oh my gosh, this girl has texted me like 7 times this morning." He's like, it's too much, right? So we know that experience because we've had it from that needy girlfriend in junior high to businesses who won't stop asking us for feedback and to do a survey and refer them. Oh, it's too much. What's the difference then? What's the magic? The difference is whether you're reaching out for you as a funeral home or you're reaching out for them as a family. It makes all the difference. It's the difference between a compliment and flattery, right? If you've ever read How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's a big difference. When you flatter someone, it's all because you want to look good in saying something nice to them. When you compliment someone, they seem very similar, but it's all because you want them to know how great they are. And there's some sincerity there. So when you're reaching out to that family to just say, hey, don't forget to leave us a Google review. Hey, we're here. We're thinking about you, but we filled out the survey. Hey, we're here. Do you want to talk to our pre-need people? If that's the only way you're reaching out to them, if that's your aftercare program, that's going to feel annoying. And they've probably had feedback from people like, leave me alone, right? That's probably why. But if instead you're reaching out to help and you're saying, hey, I've seen other people struggle with these next things. I have some things to help you. I have something. Not everyone's going to need the help, but nobody is going to balk at that. Be like, oh gosh, thank you so much. Right? You know, my wife had a flat tire at the end of a soccer game last week, and 2 or 3 people stopped to help. She had a family member who lived close who was on his way. Not a single time was she annoyed that one of those parents stopped and said, hey, can I help you with your flat tire? That's never been annoying, right? And so you think about what those moments and those experiences are. If it's there, if it's sincere and you're there to help that family, then it feels genuine, and that family's going to appreciate it. If you're only reaching out to help yourself, they're going to know that immediately. So the interesting thing is when you reach out to help them, all the things you want end up coming, right? They are more likely to do Google reviews. They're more likely to buy pre-need. They're more likely to talk to their neighbors about you. They're more likely to return, right? Those are all the things you're trying to get. It's not about you, it's about them. It's about their grieving moment. And that, I think, makes the big difference in how you reach out to someone. It's that empathy thing we're talking about. It's sincerity. People feel it, and they know when it's real and when it's not.
You know, you had the other day when we talked, you used a phrase that I really grabbed onto. You called it unexpected value and indicated that when your aftercare program delivers unexpected value, then that just pays a whole lot of dividends in the process. So I've got 3 really quick, short questions, but it's the same format. It's
Yeah.
this. What's the best time and how do you do it? So what's the best time to let a family know about the aftercare program? Because I found that if they're informed about it and they expect it to happen, then when it does happen, it's a natural answer to a natural expectation. So that's the number one. Number two is, what's the best time to ask for a Google review and how? And do you assist in your aftercare program? And the last one is that preemie thing, because what's the best time and how do you, as an aftercare serving the family guy, connect preemie? So there's 3 to fire off at you.
Yeah, great question. Great question. So best time to reach out to the family or to tell the family about your aftercare program is in the at need, right? And it has to be a time where it makes sense. So for our particular program, the way that we train our funeral directors is you're sitting across the table from a family, and you always have to ask the question at some point in your presentation, how many death certificates do you want to order? And the family goes, how many do I need? And the funeral director always has a list and walks them through it and says, you need a death certificate for all these different things. Now, they kind of look through that list and say, okay, I need 3 or 5 or 7 or however many. This is probably the first moment they started thinking about what happens after the funeral. Oh. It's like someone just put 2 big sandbags on their shoulders and they're like, oh, dang it, when am I going to have time to do that? When do I need to start? What are all those next steps? And they're starting to feel that anxiety build. And if a funeral director can understand what they're feeling emotionally and take that away and be like, hey, listen, I know this list can be overwhelming. And in fact, there's a lot of things on this list of people that need to be contacted, or there's a lot of things not on this list of people that need to be contacted. And we just saw a lot of our families struggle with it. Sometimes they gave information to wrong people. They had fraud. Sometimes they didn't get their benefits. Sometimes they missed out on things, or it took a really long time and it was really complicated. So one of the things that makes our funeral home different is we have a dedicated team to help each and every one of our families. And I'm going to assign one of our state specialists to help you. There's no charge for this. It's just something we want to do to help you. That way that family's expecting those next steps. And if you don't have that, it should be somewhere in that conversation that makes sense. Hey, you're going to get a text message from us, or you're going to get a card at Christmas, whatever your aftercare is, but it should be described right then. As far as a Google review, Google reviews have to be genuine, right? First of all, I don't think it's a good idea to blanket ask everyone a Google review, because you don't want anyone giving you a 4. And no, you don't want anyone giving you 2, and you definitely don't want anyone giving you a 1, right? And so you want to kind of understand how that family feels about you before you're asking for those Google reviews. I know that's a little bit backwards, but that's something we try to ask. Hey, what was your experience at the funeral home? And if they're really positive, hey, like, we have just helped you with all these things. Oftentimes, the way we ask Google reviews is when the family says something very, very positive to us or thinking something like, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for doing this. There was one comment I loved. I don't have my laundry done, but I have everything else done, right? And I love that feedback. That's a perfect time to ask for a Google review. And you don't do it in a selfish way. You're like, you know what? It has been so wonderful talking to you. It's been an honor. I just love helping families, and this is part of my job. And if we have been helpful, the best way you can say thank you is if you'll do a review for us. That allows us to help more families because other funeral homes don't do this for their families. And if you can let the community know that we're going to be here to help our families a little bit extra, that allows me to serve more families. So it's more of a personal thing from that person that just helped them, is a really strong way to help ask a Google review, right? Oftentimes, people aren't loyal to brands; they're loyal to people, right? We picked up some of my teenagers late at night, and of course they were starving, right? These teenage boys, they were starving, and so we took them to McDonald's, or not McDonald's. We took them to Wendy's at like midnight, and the guy who helped us was so like nice and engaging, and he gave the receipt to my wife, and he goes, "Hey, if you do a review for me, I get a little bonus from my boss." And but it's fine if you don't, but it's been really helpful. I loved talking to you and your son. And it took her like 20 minutes to get through this review. It was like a million different questions, but she wanted to do it to help that person. So the right time is understanding how that family's experience has been, at when you've given them something of value, because it's almost like a quid pro quo, and then making it about, it helps out that funeral director, it helps out that person that just served them.
Yeah, that just got me to thinking in that if we're forcing this, we're make sure you ask for a Google review, and um, then it's that slippery slope. So there's an art to this, right, Matt? So, it's understanding who really benefited from your services. And so a watch out, I think, for the profession. I know that there's a lot of automatic surveys that go out and, all of those things. And well, I have to ask for a Google review. My owner or managers told me that, this is what the expectation is. And that happened to me personally, not within death care, but I had a terrible experience with car repair and in a wreck that I had. And I was maybe on my third visit back for them to fix something that they didn't get fixed. And so the assistant manager, walked me out to my car, and he says, "Now, if you don't mind, could you give us a Google review?" And I'm like, "Do you just hear what you said?"
Right.
So, what my checklist as an employee is that I do this and I do this and that I ask for a Google review. And so it's it's training the art of what we do, not necessarily technically I have to do this every time. So, being cognizant of, I didn't give them a review because that's another, I'm like, I'm not even going to go there again. And so,
Right.
it's like, you have to be really careful in how you do that. So I appreciate you kind of bringing that up, and that sometimes processes are very important, but we also need to read the room. Right?
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's a really key piece that I think is helpful as those watching and listening today, is if you have processes, kind of think through those. We do have those employees that do everything by the book.
Yeah.
And in what we do and within this profession, art, I think, is really important. And we hear that a lot in our phone calls, and that they can be cold and clinical, or they can be very warm and opening and genuine. That, I think, that word is really key. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think as we've gone into customer experience here, and you mentioned the Wendy's experience, I am much more cognizant and aware of other companies, and I'm like, no, or I steal their ideas and how they do those things. So I think we become more visible as consumers in embracing a genuine company versus someone, who's following everything, by the books. There's nothing worse than hearing, well, that's our policy. or,
Oh,
that's just the way we do things here. And so, I really appreciate that. So I hope those of you listening kind of take heed in that, there's some art to what we do and to think about those things. I love anytime you share a resource, the Covey book, it's already on my list. And I think a lot of those kinds of things in our toolbox, that's a new word that we're using a lot, right, Pat, is that we have these kinds of things, that there are the technical things that are important. Obviously, a lot of what you've shared today are technical things, step by step that need to happen, but the self-awareness and the art of what we do needs to feed into that hand in hand. So, all right, I'll get
yeah,
off that soapbox, but I
because
yeah,
the way that they asked you, all of a sudden, you weren't a human, you weren't a person, you were just a customer. And when you are treating your families that way, if it's this stringent, we got to ask for a Google review and we got to do this, not always, not always, right? Make sure it's the appropriate time. And to Pat, to your last question, when's the right time to introduce pre-need?
Mhm.
That is 100% dependent on that family. So that's a pretty hard thing to set a policy around. One thing we do, we try to tell our families is, as we're closing up all of these state issues and wrapping up everything, we talk to the families about next steps and we introduce the concept of pre-need. We're giving them so much information. It's not a sales pitch. It's just FYI, I hope this helps. But we listen very carefully to everything that family says. And some families are like, oh, yeah, I should really get that done. Well, in that case, you should reach out right away. And some families like, oh, I'm so stressed with these other things. I probably should get that done, maybe a little bit later, but right now, there's no way I could think about that. Don't reach out to them right now, right? Maybe do a drip campaign and reach out to them in a month or two or 3 or 4, right? And so listening to your families, understanding where they are, treating them as actual human beings and individuals is going to bridge that gap and make it much stronger. Some families, you need to wait a year before bringing up pre-need. And some families, you should be bringing it up like a couple days after the funeral, right? Depending on where their head's at and where their emotional state is. That's one of the powerful parts of aftercare. When you have someone in there who's just there to serve the family, rather than get all these other things, you end up getting these results, right? You don't have ulterior motives in that. So yeah, that's what I would say to that kind of last question. I hope I answered that right.
Yeah,
there's
I
no right
know.
or wrong. I think it's the art, right?
Sure.
What we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to know exactly from each family. So pre-need can be a very important source of revenue for a funeral home or a cemetery agency. Um, and I think you do have to have a certain systematic nature of, this is what you might say. And I
Sure.
know that you do have a way of doing that when you do deem it necessary, or I would say, just from me, it should be almost included in part of the dialogue. So how do you phrase that or approach that, and who does that?
Yeah. So anything that we're teaching the family or anything you're asking the family to do, always start with why, right? So even when we're scheduling our appointment, start with why. The reason why we're doing this appointment is because 82% of widows don't receive their full Social Security benefits.
Really?
82%, right? Well, according to an audit that happened in 2019. Huge number, right? So the reason why we're doing this for you is other people are struggling and we don't want you to struggle too, right? The reason why I'm bringing up pre-need is because I see such a difference between families who come into our funeral home and everything's already pre-planned and that they don't have to think about it. That family, what a gift to that family, versus that family who walks in and they have no idea what mom wanted and they have to come up with the money to pay for it. And that stress with siblings and family members, it's just a gift to your family. So it's not something a lot of us want to think about. But the reason why I bring it up is because it really does create so much peace of mind for your family members. And so if you understand that background to it, you know, it, That's why I'm bringing it up. So that's how we introduce it. This is something we're going to tell you a couple things to get your affairs in order, and this is one thing you should consider right now, and this is the reason why I'm bringing that up. That doesn't feel like a pushy sales thing. It just feels like I'm here. I'm actually thinking about you and your needs. It might not still be a great fit. That's fine, but starting with the why and then the how next is way better than the how or the what first and then going to the why.
That's really powerful. Starting with why. I think that's um, some of the things that we talk about is the next natural step in this process is, and consumers and families don't know the process. We are living in it day in and day out, and they don't know what necessarily the expectations are. There's always mystery shrouded in what it is that we do. So, the next natural step is for this to happen, or especially with follow-up. So the next natural step is for me to call you back in a couple of days, or whatever those. And I think those start with why, because it's the next natural step in the process. So we hope that that might be a helpful kind of entree statement too. You're more than welcome to use that, Matt. That'll be $100. And me after no. But
I
I
love
think,
it.
the why is what's so important. And we've all probably felt that we've been sold something and not given a reason why we need it.
Right.
And so thinking, how do you want to feel if this were you? That's empathy. If you were in this situation, um, you know, what would you want to feel like? And so I think that's really helpful. I lost my dad 3 years ago, and I've been in the profession 35 years. And even those of us that in it forget everything.
Yeah.
And I wasn't offered any follow-up. And now looking back, I did all the legwork for my mom, when if I had even just someone's that would say, 82% of the time women, like, I'm now wondering what my mom has missed out on.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So um, we just can't assume that consumers know what those next natural steps are. And that creates an experience. And I think of the lady that you served that talked to her friend that unfortunately lost their spouse. And if you are in a market and you aren't consistent, you mentioned consistency. Well, when I worked with Downey Funeral Home, they did all of this stuff for me.
Right.
No one even mentioned this to me. So you have to be really careful in an aftercare program that you are consistent and
Totally.
that you aren't cherry picking people either. So it's not easy.
No.
There is this science and art to what we do. So I think it's important that if you are going to dig into this kind of program, that you're consistent with it, across the board. So,
Well,
yeah.
I just had a conversation with a friend, and he owns a funeral home, and he's been telling me for years that they want to use us, and then they haven't. You probably don't have any funeral homes have told you for years that they want to use dead ringers, and then they haven't actually bit the bullet. But I have several who keep on putting it off. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna just someday I'm gonna do it. Well, we're good friends and we joke with each other all the time. Anyway, he just lost his dad, and he called me and almost within a couple of hours, and he said, "Hey, my mom is really going to be stressed going through these next steps. I want to make sure she gets your help." And I was like, "It's an honor that you called me, and we will absolutely help her, and I'm not going to charge you for it. Like, we're friends. I'm going to do this for you." But after we did the service, I called them and followed up, and I put a little hot water to him, because I said, it's interesting. You were really concerned that your mom had that benefit. What about all the other families you're serving?
Right.
I know aftercare costs. I know it costs, but they feel the same way. And everything you were just saying, treat others like you'd want to be treated. If your mom were at another funeral home, wouldn't you want them to have an aftercare that actually helped her and gave her peace of mind and made sure she was taken care of in a meaningful way? Because that makes a big difference, right? And look, everyone has to deal with three problems when they come to that funeral home. They just lost their loved one, and they have to deal with the body, with the grief, and with the personal affairs of their loved one. And what percentage of your bill is that body? Right? You use a funeral home. What are you charging a family? What percent are you charging for that body? Probably a significant, right? If it's direct cremation, that's 100% of your bill, right? What percentage of that bill is dealing with the grief and the gathering and the memorial products and making them feel connected to their loved one? And what percentage of it is helping them with those next steps? It shouldn't be zero. I'm not saying it should be more than like 1 or 2%, because that's all it costs to help them in a meaningful way. But it should be something, because that's what you would want for your mom. And that, if you treat your clients as you would your own mom, then they're going to realize you're treating them like a human being, and that's that powerful moment that
Hey,
you won't
Matt,
forget.
question for you that was in the Q&A here that I wanted to just put forward. We have one in the queue right now, and it was
Yeah.
one I was actually going to ask, which is, um, what percentage of people say no? You reach out, you have this great thing, and they just go, I don't want anyone to talk to me. Maybe they're deep in their grief now, and they're in that stage where they're kind of closing up and realizing that it's really, setting in an acceptance. And so how many people are actually, do you have a percentage on your tracking of how many people say no? And what do you respond if you reach out and they say, I don't want that?
That's a great question. So we get, I think the people who are, there's about 10% who say no to us, and about 20% that we say no to them. So let me explain that. Oftentimes, there's actually quite a few who we call and they're like, no, 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 because they're always like, there's no free lunch. There's something here that you're going to try to do. And we always say, hey, that's great. Let me go through a couple things to make sure that you're taking care of this by yourself. I'm not going to, right? And people are like, oh, okay. And so we start going through, hey, make sure you're doing this. Make sure you call Social Security and you fill out Form 1724, because that's going to get your last payment. Make sure you call this person, you call this person, right? And we start kind of going through that checklist. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't know that actually. Oh, that's really important. Wait, how much does this cost again? And then we say, no, 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 this is, we're from the funeral home. We're not charging you. We're just here to help you. And they're like, oh, well, then I would love your help, actually. And so that is usually how we overcome. 10% of the families, no matter what, they're like, no, no, I don't want to deal with it. Don't even talk to me. They're not going to even let you get a word out edgewise. And that just, we all know that some families are that way. 20% of the families, we start going through the checklist and there's just not that much to do for that family. And so as we start going through that checklist, we realize, hey, look, I can set up some fraud protection for you, or I can do 1 or 2 notifications, but reality, you don't need our help with everything because there's nothing to do. And so with those families, we actually don't charge the funeral homes for those, for the ones who say no to us or them, because I only feel like I should be billing the funeral home for the services we're actually doing. So we do a credit back to the funeral home and make sure that those aren't charged, because the interesting thing is some of those families actually give us our best reviews back to the funeral home, like, well, that was amazing, because they just wanted a little bit of peace of mind. Even if there's nothing we actually had to do for them, just talking them through it and walking them and answering their questions was really meaningful for them.
Nikki, do you want to fire up that second question that's in the queue there?
Yeah. So thanks for that first question. It was a great entree. We didn't pay that. It was Ryan that asked that. So thanks. To
Right.
put into that, but kind of on, you mentioned, well, the family doesn't need this or they don't need that. And I think this kind of leads into this question. What kind of liability does a funeral home take on by trying to do all of this and provide aftercare on their own? And how do they know they are giving the correct advice?
Oh, great question. Great question, and really important question. So I have a former client who I met with, and they grew and they decided to actually do aftercare in-house. And they followed a lot of the model of what we do for aftercare. And we are not offended at all. We think that's great. It's a lot more expensive for them to do it in-house than what we were charging, but they wanted more of that personal touch. And talking to him as we started going through that review of it, I had to become very concerned about his liability. So this person was not trained properly and was doing things that were crossing into the realm of legal, giving the actual legal advice. And that is the quickest way to get sued, right? Giving someone legal advice when you're not an attorney, and now you do become liable. So I offered to give her some training and said, let her go through our training program before you let her help one more family, because you do not want that liability for you. So in order, we have insurance that covers all of our clients. So if we did ever make a mistake, it actually, all the liability goes on us and not on the client. But keeping up to date on laws, keeping up to date on what those next steps are, and how things are changing and those processes, and making sure you're not crossing the line is something that's very important. And actually, I'm going to bring this back to dead ringers here, right? Compliance and the importance of doing it right. We have our own internal quality control team that listens to calls all the time and critiques them, and we record everything we do to make sure that we are always in compliance. But we hired dead ringers because we wanted someone on the outside to look at how we're doing as well, and it was so helpful and humbling, right? There were things that we thought we were doing really well that maybe we weren't doing as good as we thought, and other things where it was confirmation, right? It was like, oh, we are doing that really well, and so that was helpful. But we started using dead ringers for that exact point. I wanted an outside view. I wanted, because sometimes you get in echo chambers and you think everything's going well, but I wanted someone who didn't work for me to evaluate what was going on. And having that evaluation what meant everything. And since that point, I think I've talked to dead ringers to about every single person that we've brought on or current client we have, because I think it's so important to be compliant, you know, all the way from that very first phone call to your aftercare, right? You have to have quality control. So we ensure that for our funeral homes. And if anyone is doing their own in-house one, give me a call. I would be happy to talk to you about where that line is and what things your in-house aftercare person can do and absolutely cannot. We had a situation where someone who worked at the funeral home gave advice to a family that they were right 90% of the time. Most families, their advice would apply to, but with this family, it was wrong, and that family incurred about a $15,000 tax bill unnecessarily. You don't want to be a business owner in that position, right? So the wrong answer is like, well, I'm not going to help with them at all, right? The right answer is do it the right way. Make sure you keep in the right parameters, right? Just as you have the compliance of how you answer the phone and what you have to say over the phone and what you have to say. There's regulations on everything, and you just have to do the right training to make sure that it's done correctly.
Well, we are coming up on the hour, but I maybe in a few sentences, what will happen to a business, a funeral home, a cemetery, if they don't do aftercare? You know, if you just simply don't embrace the concept, you know, thinking of the future, or, you know, whatever that might be, what are the risks in not providing aftercare?
Right. Aftercare for most businesses, I think, is an afterthought, right? It's the last thing, and as long as I do the rest of my stuff really, really well, then it'll be fine. If you've ever read the book The Power of Moments, you have to read that book. People remember remember the peak moment and the peak both ways, right? The really, really good and the really, really bad, and they always remember the ending. They always remember the ending. So they remember the beginning really, really well, the ending very most, and then the peak moments in between. And they'll forget all the rest. I am telling you, aftercare is important. If you don't do aftercare, you will become irrelevant. We had a funeral home in Texas who mom and dad, second marriage, right? He has a pre-need with this funeral home. She has a pre-need with this funeral home. We helped the dad. We did all of our aftercare. We helped him with everything. Then mom died about 2 years later and went to the competing funeral home. They sat down with the funeral director and said, when does my aftercare start? And they said, we don't do aftercare here. They said, are you kidding me? They came over. The entire family bought pre-need. They were mentioning it in their church group. They were mentioning it to their neighbors. They're like, you only have to go to our funeral. This Wilkerson Hatch Bailey was the funeral home. You have to do it. They are so different. And And that's the legacy. And if you don't have an aftercare program, you will become irrelevant.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned the word irrelevant, and I'll tell you here in a second. But Matt, this has been so powerful. And Pat, you always ask such great questions. So this has been really enjoyable. I now have a list of books that I need to download. And I think that's an important within our profession is to go to resources and have those. I think sometimes we don't think things apply to us because we're so unique when we're not. And
For
look at
people.
those things. Yeah. Pat, any other quick comment?
Yeah, I had one last question that I think might sum it up pretty well, which is measurement and metrics are very important. So if you're a business owner that outsources their aftercare, you said you had a dashboard. If I'm the business owner, how do I see, month to month, family to family, how well my aftercare program is being, how effective it's being, how well it's going with it in your hands?
Yeah. So we do a monthly review, an annual review, and multi-year as they go with this, plus the live dashboard. You have to keep track of your programs, right? If people are if you're never looking to keep track, what gets measured gets improved, right? And if you're measuring your aftercare and you're measuring your team and that's why Dead Ringers is that's where I feel like we kind of are hand in hand, right? Is you're measuring these things, you're going to get improvement. And that's where it's really, really important to get that feedback. That's why we feel like one of the most important things we're doing is measuring the results and then giving that feedback to the funeral home owner to give them everything from what people's impression were with their different funeral directors, the ones people liked, what they don't like with their processes, but then also how their aftercare is making a difference for them.
Well, that's all I have, Nikki, and Matt. This has really been a great deep dive into a subject that's pretty complex and also very important. So,
Well,
thank you very much. So, Nikki,
So
back
we've
to
had
you.
amazing entrees today. And didn't tell you about this one, but our next webinar is May 22nd, and that's at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And our guest for the webinar that day is Darren Crouch, and he's the CEO of Passages. And his topic is staying relevant in a changing world. So relevancy, I think, is really important. Thanks so much. And just some quick housekeeping for those of you who are on the webinar with us today, thank you. And you'll be getting an email follow-up with the recorded webinar. So if there are folks on staff that maybe need some convincing or need to learn more about the importance of aftercare, you'll have that. And we look forward to you enrolling for our next webinar on May 22nd. So Matt, thanks so much. Pat, thanks for being my good buddy and teammate. And
Always.
those of us at Dead Ringers, we really are so glad that you're being a part of our mission in creating a good customer experience for the families that we serve.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank
Thanks.
you guys.
Bye,
Hey,
guys.
thanks, everybody. See you next time. Bye-bye.